This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. You are special. Now, many of you know I have two different podcasts. One is called Avoid the Maze. That's your journey through life. That's specifically for you as an independent individual. But today, the Avoid the Maze, You Are Special, I'm reaching out to parents, educators, coaches who are helping parents with children who may have either special needs or just challenges in their lives. And my guest today, when I read your bio, Jack, on podmatch.com, it was like you just have so much information behind you. And typically, we don't start out our early life saying, hey, this is who I want to be when I grow up. I want to, know more about parenting and help people. In fact, when I think about what I wanted to do when I was a young girl, I thought I wanted to be a singer, except I don't really have that kind of talent that I could really be a singer. But that's what I dreamed about for a long time. So give us a little bit of background. Tell us who you are and how you got into this field of coaching and supporting, especially parents who are challenged with their children.
Sure. Well, I started out many years ago getting into kind of youth ministry, which then led me to believe that needed more education around helping kids with problems because I was more focused on the kids that had difficulties. And that led me on to a master's degree in counseling psych and then a PhD in counseling psych from Madison, Wisconsin. My focus there was on defining healthy separation of adolescent from parents. And one of the things that I found out of that was because I compared a delinquent group with a normal non-delinquent group. And when on two measures, one was the way in which parents would give their kids autonomy, and the other was on the way in which parents would give love to their kids. On the autonomy scale alone, the delinquent kids were higher. So in a sense, they could do whatever they wanted.
Sure.
But when you put the two together, love and autonomy, it was clear that the non-delinquent group scored significantly, statistically significantly higher. So my argument, my belief is, and what has kind of led to my work today is that parents need to be both loving and giving of autonomy. Just giving on of autonomy and backing off is not enough. So.
Right. And, for a lot of parents, including myself, that had been very, very difficult. So I have two sons, one who at 11 years old moved to go live with his dad because dad offered him a lot of extras that mom couldn't at the time. 15 years later, I had my second child and brought him up totally different, but brought him up differently for a lot of reasons. And one was that he was diagnosed on the autism spectrum. So as a parent, I looked at, oh my gosh, these are the things that I have to do to help him so he can succeed. And he did live with us until he was 30, not by choice. It was just financially the best situation for him.
Mhm.
And I didn't realize how much of an adult he was at 30 until he moved out
Mhm.
because he lived with us all that time. He was still my child. I
Mhm.
still saw him as a teenager, so that when he went out at night, I would say, well, don't forget, don't come home too late. And he'd just
Yeah,
look
what
at
time are
me,
you coming home?
right. And his eyes would roll and he'd say, right, mom. Um, but it is hard for a parent to know when to pull away. You
Mhm.
can be loving, but you still have to pull away. So,
Sure.
can you give me any kind of idea of like when that should start happening? I mean, you're not going to do it when a child is 10 years old.
Well, yeah, I think that I think that over time, I mean, from the earliest stages of the toddler, you're letting go. Then you let them go to preschool, and then they go to high school, and then they're driving a car, which is another letting go
Right.
stage. So we're constantly letting go, which is somewhat of a grieving process too for parents, that letting go. What's, I think, really important is the shift from being more directive and controlling in the process of letting go to one that's more of a consultative and coaching relationship. So the love needs to shift from trying to take care of that person and direct that person to one of supporting their identity development and their independence. So I tell parents, you need to strengthen your relationship with your teenagers and young adults, but in a different way. You're loving them in the way of helping them with their identity and their independence, which is real different than trying to control those two uh, developmental tasks.
And it's not about being their best friends when they're in high school either. Um, I remember my son came home one day from high school and he said, "Well, sure wish you were more like so and so's mom." And I said, "Why?" "Well, you know, she's his best friend." And I said, "Well, do you want me to be your best friend?" And he goes, "No." I
Hmm.
said, "So then what are you asking me?" "Well, and he started telling me things that this person could get away with because of his relationship with his mother. And I said, "So you just want me to just let you go out in the free world and do things that maybe you're not ready for?" And he kept looking at me like he wanted to say yes, but he wasn't quite ready. And like I said, he didn't move away for quite a while. But even though I would make the comments about don't forget to be home at a reasonable time, it was just words because I wasn't sitting up waiting for him to come home and I wasn't questioning him the next morning. "Hey, what time did you get in and where did you go?" So we've noticed a lot recently that in the media, but even amongst family members, we're realizing that there are more mental health issues today
Yeah.
than in the past. In your research, have you come up with any information that helps us understand why? Because we didn't talk about mental health, I know when I was growing up.
Yeah. Well, it's clear that the millennials of today and the Gen Zs have a higher level of anxiety and depression. And that was kind of amplified by the pandemic because that had quite an effect on that. Unfortunately, the levels of anxiety and depression of those two groups has not really gone down post the pandemic. It's continued to be the highest of any segment of our population. So they are still struggling. And and I think it's hard to I don't know how to indicate what the causes of that are because the other thing that we find particularly with the Gen Zs is the highest rates of loneliness too. And yet this is the most wired segment of our population is the Gen Zs. I mean, they're online all the time, social media, but there's something missing there. They're not making the kind of physical connections that I think they need to make to reduce that sense of loneliness. So we've got a lot of isolated teenagers and young adults sitting in the room online. Now, in some cases, that's all right because they're talking to people online, but I don't think it's a real good substitute for just being out there physically and hanging out with their friends. So I think that's somewhat of a contributor to this anxiety and depression problem.
Absolutely. And, I'm finding that we have more seniors in that same situation that, they feel like they don't know where to go to meet people. So they are spending all that time online as well. They
Yeah.
think that they are creating relationships and friendships, but then as soon as they walk away from their screen, they realize how lonely they truly are.
Yeah.
And I've heard that from my son, my youngest son as well. There once was a time when he lived at home that when he came home from work, he'd just go into his room and he was on his computer 24/7. Um, but now it's different. He's finding other things to keep himself busy, but he doesn't know where to go find those peers
Mhm.
one on one. So I can understand the anxiety and the depression of the thought of, am I going to be alone for the rest of my life?
Mhm.
So, how can parents help in this way? Because I know as a parent, my son doesn't want to really hang out with me. Okay. Maybe when he comes home to visit for the holidays, he'll hang out with me a little bit, but he wants to be among his peers. How do we understand what they're going through and not be overbearing in trying to help them?
Yeah. Well, there's an interesting statistic that I came across recently, comes from a book called Of Boys and Men, really talks about the young male problem right now. And these young males in 1990, about 40% would turn to their friends if they had a personal problem or issue. That's now dropped down to 22%. Now, that's bad news. The good news is that they are more willing to talk to their parents about personal issues or problems than they are willing to talk to their peer group. So I think parents being available, you know, being there and connecting to their young adults, their teens is really important. But I think the connection probably needs to take, or I mean, is best made more outside of the home, going out to lunch, doing something together, going for a walk, uh, shopping, playing golf, doing things like that, where they can have the conversation that's much more um, spontaneous and kind of informal than to kind of, what are you doing now? How are things going for you and all? But understand that the teens and young adults do want to talk to their parents, and the parents' ability to kind of listen non-judgmentally and be open and supportive. How can I be helpful to you? Is really important. I talk about a parent having a consultative role with their kids as they move into the teenage and young adult years. And what I mean by that is to say to their kids, hey, um, you need to make a decision about this, but I'm going to give you my advice, but it's your decision. It's kind of like a sandwich approach. And then you give the advice, and then afterward you say, now you understand it's your decision. I won't be mad at you if you decide to move in a different direction. That really gives them the freedom of being able to make the decision they want, but they get your advice then. Some parents just say, well, I'm not going to tell them anything. I'm just going to back off. That's that give them autonomy, but it's not showing the love that you want to have that could influence the direction they take. So,
It's interesting because my husband and I, we both parent differently. Um, my husband was brought up basically by two parents who gave him the autonomy. He knew the love was there. He knew he could go to them at any time. Um, I knew that my parents loved me, but my parents basically told us what they expected out of us. And if we didn't want to disappoint them, we took their sandwich and we gobbled it down.
mhm,
Um, but my husband is a storyteller, and up until the last year or so, my son didn't want to hear his stories. It was always, that was in your day, Dad. You
yeah,
don't know what's happening. Now things have changed. Maybe that's because he lives far enough away from us where he wants to hear these things. But I have to keep reminding my husband, don't don't share your stories with judgment, because as soon as there's judgment, he's not going to listen. And
mhm,
I understand that. And maybe that's why I decided to start coaching parents as well, because it's like we have that tendency as a parent. Well, I've been there, I know it, and I'm going to tell you how it's done.
okay.
So, how do you help a parent who doesn't realize they're being judgmental, but they are, and that's all their child is hearing from them. Do you have any tips for them on what they can do to change that?
Yeah, one of the things I coach parents on is to not say I love you, but we all do it, right? I love you, but you're sloppy or you're leaving your stuff around. And I just say keep those separate because as soon as you say I love you, but it disqualifies the first part of the sentence, and all the person remembers is the second part. I say pull those things apart. Talk to your teen or young adult separately about, hey, this is a problem. You're separating what unconditional love from conditional approval. There's no such thing as unconditional approval. Anything goes.
Right.
But you want to separate those two. But that's the kind of advice I give to parents that seems to help them kind of clarify a distinction there. So,
Well, and many of us use that phrase, I love you, but if you would do this, if you would do that. In fact, my son for a very long time used to say to us, I'll never make you and dad happy. You expect me to be perfect.
uh,
And I would look at him and say, no, we've never asked you to get all A's or to be the best at everything. We've just
mhm.
asked you to work hard at what is important to you so that you can succeed. And again, it wasn't until recently when I started listening to my own words that that's where it was coming from. It was coming from the saying of, I love you, but if you would do this.
Yeah.
And when I stopped using those terms, the difference, the communication between the two of us. And so I know it works.
Oh, good for you. Yeah.
And it's hard. It's hard as a parent when you've done it for so many years.
Oh, you
Uh,
have to bite your lip. Yeah.
yeah.
It's really is hard. I said it. I mean, everybody has. So,
So again, our children are facing these mental health challenges. Why are so many parents so afraid to come to grips with that? Do we think that it's still such a bad word? It's still something that we want to hide from?
well, I want to say something that I think is kind of a backstory to this. I believe that over time, and starting with my generation, I'm a boomer, we began to become much more invested in the happiness and success of our kids than our past generations. My parents at 18 expected me to be gone, and I didn't expect to stay there either. Like they felt like I raised you to 18, 21, or whatever, you're in college, see you later. But I think the boomer generation in particular started this trend, which I think is accelerated over Gen X and millennials now and Gen Zs, that the parents take on this sense of responsibility for the happiness and success of their kids. And that keeps extending. If they're not happy at 18 or 20 or 22, or they're anxious or something, that I have to do something about that. I have to fix that. And, you can't take over that responsibility and fix that in a person. And parents need to say, hey, you're not responsible for them. You can't fix them, particularly at the young adult stage. And your efforts to try to do that can put more pressure because now that not only does the young adult have to be happy themselves, they have to be happy for the parents' sake too. Now they
Right.
got a double pressure on them. And I think we're changing to appreciate that everybody gets anxious and depressed at times, and kids going through this critical stage of identity and independence and intimacy, these classic developmental tasks. It's tough today. And there's economic pressures right now. I mean, to try to live in an apartment is almost impossible for these kids. So there's a lot of contributors to some of the depression and anxiety of these kids beyond their own, particular mental health kind of vulnerabilities. So I think I encourage parents to support their kids and to and encourage them to see a therapist, if they're struggling, with anxiety, depression. But I also say you need to keep challenging your kids too, and not just saying, okay, I'm afraid to say anything or afraid to do anything because they're anxious or depressed. No, they can still do stuff. They can still get a job. They can go to school or whatever. So,
You know, and again, I refer back to my youngest. My oldest son seemed to put all of his ducks in a row and deal with his own issues. Although every once in a while, he's now in his late 40s. I'll hear little bits and pieces of some emotional strain, mental health strain. And he's free enough to discuss it with me. But my youngest son, for a long time, would say, I don't know how to be happy.
hmm,
And my husband is one of these people that he can look outside at a bare tree but see one little bud on it. And, he's so joyful. And he just would say to the youngest, I don't understand. Like, can't you find anything? Like, look outside, go for a walk. And it was like, you can't have him see through your eyes. You
hmm,
can tell him what makes you happy, but don't expect that he's going to see it in the same way. And I think a lot of his growing up turned out like when he did move away and to understand that, wow, what I thought was really good money and I was going to be able to have this big, nice apartment. Now I have to have this little apartment, but he's finding the good things about it and he's
hmm,
doing it on his own. And I think sometimes as parents, we almost have to push our kids just a little bit so that they can see it on their own rather than telling them, this is what makes me happy. This is what makes
sure.
me succeed. Um, because both my son and I started out doing podcasting at the same time. And I flourished with it. He got burned out. And one day he said to me, why are you flourishing and I'm not? And I said, I don't know. Maybe
Hmm,
it's not your dream. Maybe it's not what you really want to do.
hmm,
And now he does it sort of as a sideline. It's something that when he feels like it, he does it. When he doesn't feel like it, he ignores it.
hmm.
And sometimes I think as parents, we have to listen and let them express themselves. And again, let's not judge.
Sure, sure. Well, I was going to mention something about there are over 50% of 18 to 29-year-olds are living with one or both parents, highest percentage ever. And
Wow.
there's another trend that's occurring right now that is 1 in 4 young adults will cut off communications with their parents for on average 4 months. That's the good news. They cut off, but they reconnect. But there's a certain percentage that never reconnect. They're described as estranged young adults.
Right.
They don't talk to their parents ever again. They make it clear, I'm done. I'm not going to talk to you again, which is really heartbreaking for parents when that happens. But the ones that are kind of stuck at home at this point, a lot of parents will kind of push. Why don't you go get a job? Have you called? Have you called places today? Or have you called the school today or something? And and in my book, the Parents Launch Code, Loving and Letting Go of Your Adult Children, I talk about various techniques to do that you can influence your child. You can't control your young adult, but you can influence. And one of the things I say is rather than push them out, pull them out. And in that regard, I say, look, rather than say, okay, go find a job, okay, I'll go with you. I'm not going in and doing the interview, but I'm going to go halfway. I'm going to pull you out of the house. Or I had one situation where young adult was dropped out of school, was depressed. The mother invited him to go along on her Meals on Wheels delivery as a way to pull him out. Got him involved with people that were happy to see him. I mean, it got him more connected socially with people. And then I would encourage her to say, at some point, just say, I can't go today. You're going to need to drive and deliver the meals. And now he's ending up doing it. So it's a way to pull him out and get him involved. And that's a real way to lift the pressure. It's not just about medication or therapy. Work, for instance, is a great uh, distraction and contributor to feeling like you have worth and value that offsets some of the aspects of depression too. So work or volunteering are really important.
Well, and I also think as parents, sometimes we hear that our children are interested in a certain subject or a certain area. And, you know, we think, oh, you're never going to make it there. That's our impression. And one example I'll give is my youngest son um, loves to write lyrics. He does not write music, but he writes lyrics. He'll come up with a thought in his head and he'll go to somebody and say, okay, I need you to help me put this together. And that's his sideline. That's his way of expressing himself, feeling good about himself. But at one point, my husband, and I don't think he meant it to degrade him in any way, but he just said, if you really think you're going to make any money at this, you probably aren't. And my son stopped writing and
Hmm.
doing anything with music for about 6 months. And I said to my husband, why'd you do that? This was his outlet. And he goes, I don't know. I didn't mean to, but
Yeah.
it came out. Well, now my son, he works in the sports field, but on the side, he's putting music together. And
Hmm.
as he said, I don't have to get famous or rich. I'm doing something that makes me feel good. So I
Hmm.
think we have to listen more to the youth of today to find out what those things are. Hopefully, they're things that are good for them and not bad for them.
Hmm.
Um, I have a friend who tells me that her son tells her that thing that makes him feel good is drugs. And she keeps saying, don't you think there might be something else?
Hmm.
But she keeps pushing him, trying to push him away from it rather than him getting the help that he needs. And,
Hmm.
I don't know if she can get him the help, but asking the same question over and over again, getting the same answer that this is what they need to make them happy, you know, is
Yeah, a lot of time. I mean, I certainly see a lot of parents with their teenagers or young adults who are smoking a lot of weed on a regular basis, and a kind of full frontal attack on that probably isn't going to be very helpful. If you understand, well, what do you get out of smoking weed? Well, it relaxes me. Okay, let's talk about other things that could relax you. I'm not going to say, you just can't do that, or I'm, going to be mad at you if you're doing that, but let's talk about other things. So you're not feeling like you're just a victim of weed, that it has control of you. Do some other things that you can do that give you the same sense of relaxation. So that's kind of an important, I think, approach to take to that. So
I like that. And therefore you're not putting the judgment on them. You're giving them other options where
right.
they can face their challenges. So tell us a little bit about your book and how people can find it.
Okay. Yeah, it's really the product of a lot of my work with parents over the last 10, 15 years when I started to shift toward leaving more adolescent focus directly on working with parents. So it's called the Parents Launch Code, Loving and Letting Go of Our Adult Children. And really, that really is the theme of this. It's about lovingly love them out of the house. Don't kick them out of the house. So as my mission is to help parents, help kids become happy, successful, self-sufficient, independent, while maintaining a caring connection with the parent. If a young adult cuts off that relationship with a parent, that to me is a failure of launch. That's not a healthy kind of launch situation. So I talk about different practices in the book that are really important, securing the relationship with unconditional love, strengthening the relationship, by showing support for independence and identity. I have a couple healing practices because parents are, in my mind, the guiltiest segment of our population. I should have done this or I didn't do this. And you need to apologize if that's the case, because if you feel that guilt, you're likely to give into things that you probably shouldn't give into. And sometimes, so apology is important and forgiveness is important, both self-forgiveness and forgiveness of your kid. If the kid's kind of a hellraiser and all kinds of problems, you need to not hold on to resentment, but to forgive that kid. And then the fifth practice that I talk about is combining love with firmness, or nurturance and firmness, or love and backbone, and being able to stand up on your own. And I talk about when parents say, well, how do I know that I'm making the right decision? I say, ask yourself three things. First, am I doing this out of love, or is it anger, hurt, resentment, frustration? Secondly, is what I'm doing or the decision I'm making consistent with my values? Honesty, being responsible, following through, those types of things. And thirdly, is the decision I'm making or what I'm going to do likely to lead to more independence on my teenager or young adult, or dependence? And if you can kind of get through those things, it's a good way to say, okay, click, check, 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 then I think I'm making the right decision. And then the last practice is just letting go and grieving. You got to say goodbye. There is no other options. So,
Right. Absolutely. Well, I think sometimes we have to think about the fact that we got out on our own as well. So we have to expect that our children are going to want to get out on
oh,
their own.
sure,
But just to mention again, um, the estrangement issue, it's not always just because of the parent. And I'm hoping some of the parents out there will hear this, that sometimes you may never know why your child has made this choice. Um, and as difficult as it is, you have to find a way to move on. And
sure,
uh, I will just share very briefly that my oldest son, um, for about 5 years, estranged himself from me and my whole side of the family.
sure.
Um, Never found out why, but I am blessed that he came back. And I will be honest, the first thing I said to him was, I don't care. I don't care about the past. We're going to go forward. And his answer to me was, I have no idea why.
Yeah.
And I said, but it doesn't matter. And we have the best relationship that I think I ever could have had. And so it's not always going to work out that way, but sometimes you just have to just let it ride its course and just make your life the best you can.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
how
I
can
mean,
we
it's
find your
not,
book?
I have a lot of parents that are just loving, and they're really good parents. And the young teenager, young adult goes off, off the rails, and create and cuts off relationships. It may not even be because of some kind of contentious issue or whatever. Sometimes it's not really explainable. I think sometimes it's just, I want to show that I can make it on my own.
Yep.
And I have to do this. I have to cut off my contact with my parents to show, okay, I did it on my own. So I think that a lot of that is part of the explanation for, like these cut off situations. So,
So how can we find your book and follow you?
well, it's on Amazon, and you can buy it. It's, as paperback. You can download it as a on Kindle, or e-copy of it. And my website is called parentslettinggo.com. So, access that, sign up for my blogs, because I've probably done over 100 blogs at this point, and they address a lot of these issues that parents have. So it's good to get into that website, look at those blogs. You can almost find, oh, I'm having this type of problem. Here's a response to that problem. So,
Sounds wonderful. Well, all that will be in the show notes. So for those of you listening, you can find the information that you're looking for. And I wish everyone, happiness, but you are responsible for your own, not for anyone else's. Have a great day, Jack. Thank you so much. Bye-bye
Okay,
now.
thank you.